Renewable energy is an important part of a carbon neutral future. There are many kinds of renewable energy sources, like wind, water, and nuclear power. But what about the energy source that sustains life on this planet, the sun? According to research done on the US solar market and supply chain by the Department of Energy, the United States is the second largest global photovoltaic PV for short, in other words, solar panel market, representing about 10 to 15% of global PV demand after China. So we have a very important part to play in the potential for solar power globally. Today, I will touch on how solar power affects the environment, people, and the economy, where it does well, and where it needs to improve. So, let's talk about solar power's relationship to the environment. In essence, solar panels are a net positive. It's common knowledge that they can last for a very long time, which means they are more sustainable than fossil fuels. In an article from 2007, published by the United Nations, written by Ron Reich, he writes, "Solar power produces no emissions during generation itself, and life cycle assessments clearly demonstrate that it has a smaller carbon footprint from cradle to grave than fossil fuels." That's awesome, and intuitive too. However, the process of making them is not without its consequences. When the raw minerals are being mined to make these solar panels, that's a time when environmental concerns come up. In La Libertad, Peru, a 17-year-old mine stopped operating in 2012 after 5 emergency declarations of high levels of metal contamination in the Mochi River. That's according to Charlie Hoffs from the Independent Chronicle, Union of Concerned Scientists in 2022. The Institute for Human Rights and Businesses reports that of the top 300 underdeveloped copper ore reserves in the world, 47% are located on or in indigenous lands, 65% are in high water risk areas, and 65% are in or near biodiversity conservation areas. And with that said, the people who are dealing with these environmental impacts do not at all relate to solar power the same way we do. For us in the US, solar power is a commodity, a new technological advancement that we have little relationship to other than as consumers, which is wonderful for us. But, according to Hoffs, silver mining, mainly based in Mexico, China, Peru, Chile, Australia, Russia, and Poland, can sometimes cause heavy metal contamination and community displacement. Silver and aluminum are important elements needed in the manufacturing of solar panels. According to Hoffs, mining aluminum requires lots of land, often encroaching on indigenous lands, as in Australia, where 28% of the world's bauxite, another mineral necessary for solar panels, is produced. Speaking of people's lands, let's take a look at how solar power affects the economy here on American soil. At the micro level, solar power is a smart investment. In the 2023 article, "What are the advantages and disadvantages of solar energy?" Martina Igini writes, "While the cost of panel itself is the most critical part of the overall equation, solar is definitely a cheap source of power that can considerably lower the electricity bill in the long run. It's terrific to know that you can save money and do good for the environment. But, as the US Department of Energy notes in their 2022 findings, more than 3/4 of PV modules, or solar panels, are made in China. It currently costs 30 to 40% more to manufacture a solar panel in the US, and as of February 2022, there was no domestic production of wafers, the thin metal slice that gets turned into a solar cell. This is due to far lower prices abroad and Chinese tariffs. So yeah, we've got a long way to go, before we become a solar self-sufficient powerhouse. Now, as I wrap up, there are a couple of things to consider. One is that, yes, solar power is a better alternative to gas and fossil fuels as far as sustainability, carbon emissions, and longevity, hands down. Another thing to note is that it has a long way to go. There are a few fronts it can improve on before it's untouchable. Environmentally, mining could improve by staying away from high water risk areas or biodiversity conservation areas, for example. Ethically, mining need not encroach on indigenous lands and pollute the land of the miners themselves. And economically, some domestic manufacturing of solar components would have positive effects on solar power's economic advantages. There's a lot being invested into a carbon neutral future, and solar power has a bright future and radiates with potential.